Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending upon where you are joining us from today. Welcome to this Agile Business webcast series broadcast, Agile, Everywhere, Busting the Myths Once and for All. This webcast is brought to you by CMC Media and is sponsored by IBM. I'm Bob Aiello, Editor-in-Chief of CM Crossroads, and I'll be your moderator today for this webcast. In just a few moments, Scott Ambler will join us to discuss the current state of Agile technology. But first, a few housekeeping details. Our live webcast is intended to be completely interactive, so you'll have the ability to post your questions at any time during the broadcast or chat with other attendees about the session. Just use the live chat window directly below the webcast window. You can also undock the chat box from the screen using the pop-out button at the bottom right corner of the chat box. That way it won't get hidden behind the slides. If you'd like to share your thoughts about today's events, please go ahead and use Twitter and Facebook. There's links above the slides that'll help you to share. A tweet roll panel will show you today's active comments on the right. You'll want to use the hash sign AgileLC. And that hashtag will go in your tweets, and then everyone will see it on the tweet roll. If you would like a copy of the presentation materials for today's session, you'll find a button to download a copy of today's presentation and other files under the Resources tab at the top right of the page. A recording of the entire live broadcast, including questions and answers, will be available in about 24 hours at the same location, so you can come back again or recommend it to a friend. And finally, if you ever need to get a closer look at any slide during the presentation, just hover your mouse over the video player and click the full button to expand to full screen. So let me introduce Scott Ambler. Scott Ambler is the Chief Methodologist for Agile at IBM Rational. He travels the world helping clients to understand and adopt software processes that are right for them. A prolific author, Scott has received awards for several books, including those focused on the unified process, agile software development, unified modeling language, and development based on the capability maturity model. A widely recognized expert on agile process, he is a regular speaker at international IT conferences and a senior contributing editor for Information Week. Scott also writes the Agile Software Development at Scale blog on IBM Developer Works. Prior to working for IBM, Scott led the development of several software processes, including Agile Modeling, Agile Data, Enterprise Unified Process, and Agile Unified Process. He holds a bachelor's degree in computer science and a master's of information science from the University of Toronto. The floor is yours, Scott. Welcome to the broadcast.
Great, thanks, Bob. So what I'd like to talk about today is I basically want to bust a few of the myths about Agile that you might have heard over the years. It's pretty amazing, but I still run into companies and organizations around the world that still have some of these myths. So I'm going to talk about 4 basic topics today. I'm going to first do a very brief introduction to what we call disciplined agile delivery. Disciplined agile delivery is a hybrid method that is the basis for scaling. So I believe some of the myths still exist because of the narrow focus we've had in the agile world for a long time now. Then I'm going to spend a fair bit of time talking about these myths. We'll get into those in a few minutes. And then I'll briefly talk about what we see to be the future of Agile. I was one of the attendees of the 10-year anniversary meeting in Snowbird a couple months ago, where we developed 4 belief statements as to what we believe to be something that the Agile community needs to focus on for the next few years. And then finally, I'll talk about how do you adopt agility at scale, because many of the Agile myths that we see are around scaling. So the data life cycle. What we see here is the life cycle for disciplined agile delivery. This is what we call to be risk and value driven. So if you're familiar with Scrum at all, then you'll see how Scrum is in the center during the construction effort of the Agile process, the Scrum lifecycle. And this lifecycle is a very common thing that we see in many organizations. But what's also common is that we see organizations around the world having to extend Scrum. It's very common for people to talk about how they extend Scrum with the practice of extreme programming. But what they don't often talk about is some of the other effort around that. So, for example, they will also they'll add what's called Sprint Zero or an Inception Phase or Iteration Zero to get the project going. And this is actually where many of the Agile modeling practices kick in. So you do some initial architecture envisioning, some initial requirements envisioning that the product backlog has to come from somewhere. We also see some sort of hardening sprint or hardening iteration towards the end of transition or a release iteration. So one of the things we've done with Disciplined Agile Delivery is we've made this work explicit because this is something that organizations around the world are struggling to figure out. And it doesn't make a lot of sense to have to reinvent the wheel. It's wonderful rhetoric that Scrum is a process framework, and it very clearly is, but it needs to be a delivery process framework, not just a construction process framework. So anyways, Disciplined Agile Delivery brings a lot of those concepts into play and puts them all together in one spot. So it also brings a few other things. So not only is it value driven like Scrum, so it's producing a potentially consumable solution every iteration or every sprint, it's also addressing many of the common risks that we see. So along the bottom of the life cycle, you see these what's called milestone points. And the observation is that there's these common risks that IT projects have to address, or should address at least. So those milestones should be built right in. Now, that doesn't mean, so just because I'm using the term milestone, that doesn't imply you need some, anal retentive bureaucratic review process that takes weeks or months to do, but it does mean that you probably should spend a couple hours and at each of these points to do a reality check to make sure that you're actually safe to proceed. So this is the basic idea. So Disciplined Agile Delivery is the foundation for, as we'll soon see, is the foundation for scaling Agile, because until you have something that looks pretty darn similar to this, you're not going to be able to scale Agile into the situations that we find ourselves in. And I think because of this lack of a common life cycle like this, this is one of the reasons why we see so many myths that still persist in the Agile community. So we'll get into those myths in a second. So this slide here just shows some of the foundation for Disciplined Agile Delivery. So and you'll have to, so you can see, I think, pretty clearly how the Scrum lifecycle came into play and how there were some aspects of unified process and maybe a little bit of Agile modeling. But you'll just take my word that many of the practices of Agile modeling and extreme programming are in behind the scenes and behind this lifecycle, and they're built right in. So there's a lot less work for you to do to adopt this sort of stuff. So anyways, this is something to think about. And it's also bringing in governance and other good mature aspects of software development into the overall picture. I'll talk a little bit about Disciplined Agile Delivery towards the end of this webcast. So let's get into the myths. Let's get into the heart of this presentation. There's 7 myths that I want to talk about, and as you can see here, there's still myths around how Agile doesn't work for large teams or geographically distributed teams. I was actually conversing with somebody earlier today about how she was in a meeting with a bunch of really expert Agile people, and they were still promoting some of these myths. It was absolutely crazy, some of the things I was hearing from her, and it shows a cultural challenge that we're currently suffering from in the Agile community, that people are struggling to observe what's actually going on out there. So I'm gonna share with you. So when we get into each one of these myths one at a time, I'm going to share with you industry data, and I'm going to show that because I'm a firm believer in having fact-based discussions. And one of the challenges with process is that it's all about religion, and you can have very interesting religious discussions, but you struggle to come to a conclusion. So I would rather bring some real data into the picture and share with you some of the things that we're actually seeing in the industry. So I'm going to share data with you, and then I'm going to tell you how people are actually addressing these issues that we're bringing up. So anyways, let's get into it. So as I said, I'm going to bring in some data into the picture here. I'm also a firm believer in openness and in honesty. So all the data that I share with you are coming from 2 different types of surveys. One survey, and all this is going to be clearly marked, so when we see some of the slides, it'll be pretty obvious, I hope. But there's two different types of survey. There's one that I've labeled with DDJ for Dr. Dobbs Journal, and these are surveys that I've done through the Dr. Dobbs website, through their mailing list. And so as a result, that readership is fairly diverse. So it enables me to compare and contrast what people are actually doing, and particularly at a paradigm level. So I'm one of the few people, one of the few researchers in the world that's actually spent a fair bit of effort coherently and hopefully fairly comparing the various paradigms, because these are the sorts of issues that we're dealing with. So anyways, I'll share some data from that. I'll also share, I've also run some surveys that I call the Ambisoft surveys, and these are surveys that I do on my own, and they're almost all, well, at least all the ones I'm going to share with you today, they are all geared towards the Agile community. So you'll probably see an email. So if you're on any of the Agile forums at all, you'll probably see the occasional email from me pestering people to spend a few minutes and fill out a survey. If you ever do see an email from me like that, please take the time to do so, because all this data gets given back to the community, and we can start having open and honest conversations about what's actually going on, as opposed to some of the marketing rhetoric that we're hearing from various consultants and various vendors and the occasional alliance. So let's start having fact-based discussions as opposed to religious-based discussions. So anyways, you don't have to trust me on any of this, by the way. You can actually download the data free of charge, analyze it yourself, and you can see what's actually going on out there, and you can judge whether or not these surveys are open and honest, as my wild claims make them out to be. So anyways, let's get into it. So one of the big myths that we hear about Agile, and I guess there's a pun there, is that Agile doesn't work for large teams, and this is completely and utterly not true. So here's some data from a survey I did a little over a year ago now, and this is Dr. Dobbs survey, so it's a wide range of readers. So the people that were claiming to be Agile, one of the questions that I asked them was, well, what's the largest team size the organization has successfully applied Agile strategies with? And sure enough, the vast majority are saying that they've applied Agile on smaller teams, and that makes sense because the vast majority of IT teams are actually quite small, 10 people or less. But what's interesting is that we're seeing people report success at reasonably large programs. So, we're seeing medium-sized teams of 21 to 30 or 31 to 50, but we're also seeing larger teams, in the 50-plus range. So, a very important point that I want to make here, and this is true of a lot of the other slides that I'm going to show when we get into the data, is that your mileage may vary. So just because some people are succeeding at large-scale Agile teams doesn't mean that you automatically will. So so please don't just assume that tomorrow you can go out and put together a team of 500 people and do Agile and be successful. You got to be smart about it. So we'll talk about some techniques about being smart about it in a couple minutes. But it is important to observe that it is possible, and this is one of the things that I was trying to achieve with the November 2009 survey, was I wanted to start collecting data that shows that there are some exemplars out there of people scaling Agile, of people doing these things, which some of the consultants will tell you can't be done. Well, we have data points now, so it is in fact true that you can do Agile on very large projects. And what should be interesting, and I'm going to provide a reference to a book in a few slides, but at IBM, we've been applying Agile successfully on very large Agile teams for many years now. And we're developing products such as DB2 and Kix and WebSphere. These are fairly complex, fairly large team, fairly complex projects, fairly complex pieces of software with a wide range of users. And this is mission-critical software for many organizations around the world. And we're successfully, and for many years, have been successfully applying Agile techniques to help develop those products. So this is being done in large-scale, mission-critical projects. So I think this is a thing we should observe. This is from another survey, one I did almost a year ago now. And one of the things I wanted to do was, I'm a firm believer in comparing the various paradigms. And because I'm trying to answer the questions around, when does it make sense to do Agile? When does it make sense to be traditional? Because there are in fact some situations where it does make sense to take a traditional approach. That might not be something the Agile Journal community wants to hear, but it is in fact true. So we need to respect that. Now, to be fair, it doesn't appear that there's many situations where traditional makes sense, but there are some. So the way you read this slide, though, is it compares the success rates of the four paradigms that we're looking at. We didn't look at Lean, and we're going to start looking at Lean probably this year. There's just not enough people doing Lean yet. I've been asking about Lean for the last 6 months in various surveys, and we're not seeing, we're seeing a small percentage of organizations doing Lean, but it's not enough to get a statistically satisfying group of data yet. But we'll get there, though, because Lean is obviously growing. But anyway, so of the four paradigms that we looked at, ad hoc is our term for no defined process at all, so that that can be a bit confusing to people. But what we're seeing is that there was a couple interesting trends here. First, the smaller the team, the higher the success rate, regardless of paradigm. And this isn't something new. This is something that we've had good research data on for years now, and it shouldn't be a surprise that it's easier to succeed at smaller teams than it is at bigger teams. But it's nice to have some comparative data. But what's also interesting was what we're seeing here is that agile and iterative approaches have statistically the same success rates. So for all the rhetoric that we hear about the evils of the unified process and other iterative methods, the reality is the agile community has not statistically has not been any more successful than what we were doing 10 years ago, which is an interesting observation. So, and this is something that we don't hear a lot about in the Agile community for some reason. But what is also interesting is that Agile is in fact doing as good or better than traditional regardless of team size. Because one of the things that I was trying to explore was that perhaps traditional was much better for larger teams. Apparently that's not the case. So anyways, here's some interesting data that you might want to be able to, reuse in your organization if you're having arguments over the scalability of Agile. So how do you make large Agile teams work? So this is one of a slide out of IBM's Disciplined Agile Delivery course where we're talking about in that course we talk about small team, how do you organize small teams and medium-sized teams and large teams. So this is I stole the large team slide basically, and what we're getting at here is that when you go to a larger team, there's a slightly different organization structure than what you see in smaller teams. So, we see some new roles. So, for example, an architecture owner role comes out. This is something that I've described in detail on the Agile modeling site. We see some sort of a leadership team. So we see teams of teams. We also see some sort of a leadership team coordinating everything. So, the team leader, scrum master, is part of the overall project management team, and they're coordinating, project issues. The product owner is part of a product ownership team. There's often a chief product owner who's responsible or guiding that whole team. And there's an architecture owner team that's responsible for the technical issues. You also see specialists popping up on sub-teams. This is particularly true if you're taking a component team approach, although it can also be true on feature teams. So for example, if you've got feature teams that are focusing on user interface-oriented requirements, you'll often see a UI specialist or a UI UX specialist on the team focusing just on that. And we also see a supporting cast. You might have independent testing going on. You might have a separate one or two people doing integration. If it's a really big system, integration becomes very interesting. So anyways, there's a lot of good stuff going on here. And it's an important point is that, and I think maybe this is one of the reasons why we see so much confusion around large team Agile, is that there was this concept that to scale Agile, all you needed to do was hold an extra 15-minute meeting every day, a scrum of scrums, and everything would work out fine if you just did that. And yes, you need to coordinate without doubt, but there's a little more to it than holding a 15-minute meeting every day. So anyways, and there's a bunch more techniques other than that, but here's a few basic ideas, and we'll get into more scaling techniques in a few minutes. So myth number 2, we hear all the time that you can't do geographically distributed development using Agile. Well, once again, this is also not true. Within IBM, most of our team, particularly the larger ones, are distributed in some way. Even if we're just distributed across several floors in the same building, there's some level of distribution. let alone if we're far located and we have people in other countries. And it's actually quite common for IBM and many organizations to have distributed teams like that. And we're actually seeing this. So once again, here's some results from one of the Dr. Dobbs surveys. And I asked about different levels of geographic distribution. And once again, I asked, has your organization been successful with Agile teams at this these given levels of geographic distribution? And sure enough, we're seeing that a decent-sized percentage of respondents indicated had some people working from home. So obviously there's some distribution there. Almost half said they had some Agile teams where people were far located. And what we mean by far located was that if you wanted to hold a daily stand-up meeting, somebody would have to hop on an airplane to get there. So a significant distance away. And what's also interesting is that regardless of the rhetoric that we hear from all these consultants and in all these books and in all these articles, and for over a decade now, we've heard this rhetoric that Agile teams are co-located. Well, yeah, many of them are, as we're seeing here, but less than half are co-located. And it's interesting. I've been asking this sort of a question for many years now, and I have yet to run a survey in either the Agile community or in a wider range of community where it's been reported that the majority of teams are co-located. So we need to start observing what's really going on here and start talking about it, because the majority of Agile teams are geographically distributed at least a bit. So we need to respect that, and we need to start talking about that and being a little more honest about it than we actually seem to have been. Here's another. Here's an Agile, one of my Agile surveys where I went against the Agile Alliance mailing list and the Agile Project Management list and a few others, and I believe this went out to the Extreme Programming list as well. And here's the people who are claiming to be doing Agile, who are focused on Agile, and once again we're seeing the same basic numbers where less than half of the teams or less than half the people are saying that currently they're on a co-located team. So let's just start talking about these sorts of things. So, and once again, here's another survey where we compared the teams by paradigm and by geographic distribution, because once again, I was trying to find out, are there situations where maybe traditional works better than Agile? And as you're seeing here, well, once again, no. Agile is, even when it's far located, so airplanes are involved, Agile is just as good at far located, geographically distributed development teams as traditional is, because it could have been the case that traditional was better for highly distributed teams. Actually, it doesn't seem to be the case, but good to know. And then finally, so how do you do geographic distributed development in an Agile manner? Now, obviously, this isn't everything you need to do, and one of the things I always suggest is this book. This book came out from IBM Press about a year ago, A Practical Guide to Distributed Scrum. And this, and to be fair, it's about far more than just Scrum, because as we all know, Scrum is actually fairly small. It's about project leadership and some aspects of requirements management, which is great. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. But to make Scrum work, you're also doing extreme programming, you're doing some Agile modeling stuff, you're doing a bunch of other things, just as we saw earlier on in this presentation when I was talking about the disciplined Agile delivery lifecycle. So anyways, back on track here. So the point that I want to make is that this book is a great book for lessons learned about scaling. So it's about more than just Scrum, and it's about more than just geographic distribution. It brings in large team issues and brings in regulatory compliance issues in some cases. But this book really shares a lot of advice from teams that are actually doing this in the real world, actually doing Agile at scale in the real world. There's a lot of advice coming out from internal IBM teams, like the DB2 team and the Kix team and some Rational teams, and I believe there's some advice from Lotus, but there's also advice from people who are working with customers, some of the consultants. One of the things that I do in my job is I work with customers most of the time. So there's some advice in there about how are customers, how is like non-IBM organizations, how are they doing agility at scale? So there's a bunch of good ideas there. So when you're doing distributed Agile development, you'll change the way that you plan the project. Your planning effort will be a little more distributed, because if you've got people all around the world, you're going to have to find a way to either get all those people involved to do some initial planning and then share the planning effort, or throughout the life cycle, the various sub-teams are going to be doing planning, and then they'll coordinate with the overall leadership team, as we saw in that previous slide. You'll be doing a little more requirements envisioning up front. You'll be doing a little more architecture envisioning up front. There's an Agile methodology called the Eclipse Way, and the Eclipse Way, as the name indicates, is the process that the Eclipse team follows. And the Eclipse team has been doing distributed Agile development now for, I don't know, 7 or 8 years at least. And that team is headed up by Eric Gamma, the design patterns dude. And there's a bunch of really smart people working on that team. And one of the practices that they talk about is something called API first. And the basic idea is that because they're a distributed team, you get different people working on different aspects of the overall Eclipse product group. What happens is they begin each release with a discussion of what is the architecture for this next release, what are the interfaces going to be, and they decide on the interfaces early on in the project. So they do some initial architecture modeling, and they get it down to the interface definition level, and that then enables the various sub-teams to work on their own, because as long as the technical interfaces are defined, that the teams can start decoupling themselves. And it's not quite as ideal as that, but that's the basic idea. Do a little bit, a little more architecture modeling up front, get your act together, and that's going to enable you to be more successful on a distributed team. There's going to be additional roles. We saw different roles than what we're used to in the Scrum Scrum out of the box world on that large team slide a few slides ago. You're going to have to rethink your tooling strategy. I'm obviously biased because I work for IBM, but we have a very interesting product called Rational Team Concert, which is a tool that's geared for distributed Agile development teams, and it's being developed by a distributed Agile development team. And what's interesting about that is it brings in a lot of the features that you require to be successful at not only at just normal Agile development, but also Agile at scale development, which I think is interesting. And what should be truly interesting, so that way it doesn't seem like as if this is just a marketing pitch. For a long time now, you've actually been able to download RTC for up to 10 users with an unlimited time license, absolutely free of charge from jazz.net. So we're giving, for smaller teams, we're giving this out for free. So you don't have to cobble together all this open source stuff even for small team development. You can actually just download it and be up and running very quickly. So anyways, it's something you might want to take a look at, but please don't trust me at all. Go check it out for yourself. And there's other things too. You should adopt a lean development governance approach. I'll talk about governance in a few minutes. You might want to do continuous project monitoring. You can actually automate a lot of the metric. If you're using instrumented tooling that's integrated, you can automate a lot of your metrics, a lot of your status reporting type things. So you can automate things like your burn down charts, for example. That's an aspect of status reporting that's popular in the Scrum world, for example. So why go through all the bureaucratic effort of doing that by hand when you can just automate it? So there's a few interesting things that development teams might be interested in there. But please don't trust me. Check it out for yourself. Myth number 3: Agile doesn't work in regulatory environments. Once again, this myth is absolutely false. There's a lot of evidence out there that Agile teams it's actually very easy to be successful in regulatory environments doing Agile. So for example, once again, in the November survey, we found that people were reporting that, they were successfully doing Agile in Sarbanes-Oxley environments, in HIPAA environments, in FDA, life-critical environments, and they're successfully doing Agile, as well as a few others. So these are just a few points, but the fundamental point that I want to make is that other organizations are very clearly succeeding at Agile in regulatory environments. So if they're doing it, you might be able to do it as well. So don't let anybody tell you any different. And frankly, if you go poking around in the net, you can find experience reports and case studies, conference presentations, all that good sort of stuff. So it is possible. From one of the Ambisoft, one of the Agile surveys, I was asking questions around, does your team have to comply to industry regulations? And the Agile people themselves, the hardcore people that could have been ranting about how 5 minutes earlier they could have been complaining how it's not possible to do Agile in regulatory environments. When you get them away from the public forums and you start asking them in private what they're actually doing, you find out that a third of them are complying to industry regulations in some way. You find out that almost 10% of them are doing CMMI in some way. Oh no, CMMI, evil stuff. We couldn't possibly do CMMI in Agile. My God, the heavens would explode, and we'd all be smitten if we were even consider doing that. So I'm obviously being a bit facetious here, but the fact is some people are succeeding at that, and we might want to respect that. So how do you succeed at regulatory compliance? Well, the reality is you're going to have to change a few things. There might be a little more documentation to do. You might have to hold reviews. Some regulations require you to have evidence of following the process and having a documented process. Some of them will require you to do traceability and have independent testing and a few other things. And that's okay. There's good reasons for that. It's all about mitigating risk. The regulations don't exist because somebody was bored one day and put together some regulations. They exist because there's some risks that they're trying to address, that there's some good ideas that they're trying to achieve. So once again, we need to respect that. Having said that, though, one of the challenges with regulatory compliance is that it gives the bureaucrats among us an opportunity to come out of the woodwork and really mess things up. So it's phenomenally boring, but what I suggest is that if you are in a regulatory environment, it behooves you as a professional to actually read the regulations and see what they say. Because what you'll discover in many cases is the interpretation of the bureaucrats in your organization, how they interpret the regulations may be very, very different as to what's actually written. And until you are armed with knowledge, you will never, ever be able to fight those battles. So it's very possible to address regulatory stuff in a streamlined manner if you choose to work that way. Myth number 4, Agile doesn't work for my domain. It's great for everybody else, but it doesn't work for, couldn't possibly work for me. I go into organizations around the world, and a few weeks ago I was working at a bank, and working with some banking people, and they were saying, well, yeah, that Agile stuff sounds pretty good, but it couldn't possibly work for financial institutions. It's only good for retail. And you go talk to a retail organization and say, well, it's really good for it's really good for telecommunications, but couldn't possibly work for retail. Talk to the telecom guys, and they say, well, yeah, it's really good for financial, but couldn't possibly work for telecom. So the reality is that Agile is being applied across a wide range of domains. We see this in the Dr. Dobbs journals, or the Dr. Dobbs journal surveys all the time. We even see this in the Agile surveys as well. Because some of the standard questions that I ask, or almost always ask in the surveys, is, what sector do you work in? And I always get people, saying that they're doing Agile in all of the sectors. So there are data points. People are succeeding at all these sectors, including the government, including retail, including medical and financial and retail and all that good sort of stuff. So people are in fact succeeding at these various domains. And and if you were, so when people are wondering, is this going to work in my domain? Go out there and do a search. Like, it's not that hard to find some discussions and sometimes experience reports, and yes, even case studies have been written up. So you might find something or research papers. It's amazing how often you will run into the various research paper, and they'll say that they were doing this research in Acme Bank. They won't name the exact bank, but well, it's in a bank, a financial institution, so there's some evidence that they're succeeding at Agile in that environment. So once again, we need to observe these sorts of things. But having said that, I'm not a big fan of case studies myself. The juicy information seems to get left out of them all the time. And the other problem with waiting for case studies is that it pretty much guarantees that your organization is going to be a follower. If you're waiting for 3 case studies of organizations that look just like you doing some new thing, you are by definition at the back of the pack. This is not a good competitive strategy for most organizations because you're always playing catch up. So it's really sort of an unfortunate habit that many organizations have. You might want to take on a little more risk every so often. We've also heard that Agile is undisciplined, and this is usually the traditionalists are making these claims. And to be fair, though, there are many teams out there that are claiming to be Agile, like these hacker teams that they're running around, they're not running documentation, therefore they're saying they're Agile. Well, no, they're hacking and they're making the rest of us look bad. So we need to be a little careful on that. But anyways, what we do see though is many traditionalists still seem to confuse bureaucracy with discipline. And when we get into governance in a few minutes, this is the case in many organizations where they believe that this creation of these documents and the review of these documents and are actually an example of progress, and they're an example of being disciplined. No, they're not. They're bureaucracy. Bureaucracy is bureaucracy and discipline is discipline. So you need to step back and ask yourself some basic questions, like how much discipline does it take to write a specification or to review something? Not much. It's not that big of a skill, actually. But step back and think about some of the Agile techniques, like test room development, where you write a single test before you write just enough code to fulfill that test. That's pretty easy to say, but if you've ever actually tried it, not only does it require skill, but it requires discipline, because it's pretty easy to assume that, oh yeah, I don't have to worry about writing my new test. I'm perfect. I'm the greatest coder in the world. I'll just write this code and not bother to test it. Well, you can imagine what's going to happen there. Or doing things like continuous integration, or having the skills and discipline to regularly deliver a consumable solution, something that the Scrum guys call a potentially shippable software. In disciplined Agile delivery, we call it a potentially consumable solution, because there's more to development than just the creation of software. We're doing documentation, we're working on hardware, we're probably changing the business process. So we really should be solution focused and not just software focused. And it should also be consumable. It should be usable. The stakeholders should want it. I've seen too many Agile teams that are doing a wonderful job from an Agile point of view, and they still produce software that people really don't like using. And you can see this on the web all the time. There's some really crappy looking websites out there, or other applications, and it's because they're not worried about consumability as much as they should be. They're banging away on all these features, and the individual features look pretty good, but together it's a bit of a dog's breakfast. So we really need to up our game a bit. Or the creation of just sufficient artifacts, or just barely good enough artifacts. So doing just enough modeling, doing just enough documentation to get by, and then having the courage to address the rest of that, to do the rest of that, to know that you can, if you need to do more modeling or more documentation or more work on something, that you can actually do it, that you don't have to document everything to the nth degree before you can move on and start doing something else. So this is, all these techniques and more, obviously, require significant discipline to pull off. So we need to start communicating this to the traditionalists. We also need to start communicating this sort of stuff to the hackers as well. So just because you're not writing documentation, or just because you're banging out code really quickly, doesn't mean that you're Agile. There's a little more to it, a little more discipline to it than just doing that. I also hear this myth all the time that you can't govern Agile teams, and this, I think, is going to be, this issue here is probably, one of the last holdouts of the project management community, particularly the senior management community, where we're seeing, and it's because of a fundamental misunderstanding of what Agile is all about. It's also, I believe, a fundamental misunderstanding of their ability to govern traditional projects, because traditional projects are so opaque. I have no idea actually how I could accurately and efficiently govern a traditional project other than being on the floor constantly, keeping an eye on those guys. Traditional IT projects are virtually ungovernable, which we actually see, and you can actually observe that in your organizations if you choose to. But anyways, let's talk about governing Agile projects. The reality is that Agile teams are significantly easier to govern, like orders of magnitude easier to govern than traditional teams, and it's for a couple of reasons. First, Agile teams provide significantly greater visibility to people outside the team, including stakeholders, senior management, and everybody else. You see exactly what the team is delivering, and the reason why is because we're producing potentially shippable software, or better yet, potentially consumable solutions every iteration. We're providing status reporting. We're providing accurate status reporting, particularly when it's done in an automatic manner based on the activities of people using the tools themselves, and not just somebody writing a status report or banging in some data into an Excel spreadsheet and saying, yeah, here's our burn down chart. Trust me. No, I better to automate that. There's significantly more opportunities for stakeholders to steer the project, because we ask for active stakeholder participation. This is something called on-site customer from XP. In Agile modeling, we took it one step further and said not only should the customer be on-site, but let's put them to work, because there's a lot of stuff that the stakeholders can actually do, and this is completely and utterly fair. We have a risk value life cycle, so we have these explicit, lightweight milestone reviews. So we have these, at least in disciplined Agile delivery we do. So there's many more opportunities for visibility, many more opportunities to steer. But the bad news is that, or the challenge, I guess, is that we're going to require our stakeholders to be actively involved and accountable. So yes, we're going to let them change the requirements, and yes, we're going to give them information and probably more information than they want. And yes, we're going to ask them, to steer the project, but we're going to hold them accountable for those decisions. So there's some responsibility, rights and responsibilities going on here. So anyways, there's some good questions coming in. I'm going to stop for a second and answer a couple. Okay. Oh yeah. So there's a question around fixed price quotes. Okay, so this is a push button topic for me. So what I would do is I would suggest that you Google the term Ambler and fixed price, and you'll probably find far more information than you want. But the short story is that from a business point of view, I consider fixed price IT projects to be grossly incompetent. It's just phenomenally bad business. So the people who are asking for fixed price contracts really don't get it. And that, I think, is a polite way of saying that. And just because it promotes, and the reason why is it promotes phenomenally bad behavior on the part of IT professionals. From an IT point of view, it's unethical to sign up, in my opinion. This is not the opinion of IBM. This is the opinion of Scott Ambler, so feel free to quote me on this. It is unethical for IT professionals to sign up for a fixed price contract. Because there is, unless it's for something trivial like giving a training course or something. But if you're doing like a software development project, fixed price is unethical. And the reason why is there's just this overwhelming evidence this is a bad idea. And this is not a paradigm thing, by the way. It's easier to do fixed price with Agile than it is with traditional, but still a really bad idea for Agile teams as well. So anyways, feel free to, like I said, Google that, and you'll find a lot more information. And actually, my April column in Dr. Dobbs' journal goes into this in detail. I recently ran a survey that explored the behavior that we see on IT teams that when they get in trouble and they've got they got fixed price and all that good sort of stuff, and it's absolutely abhorrent. When you take a look at what's going on here, and I believe this is one of the reasons why, and it's because of this very poor behavior that we have. We do change prevention, we lie about what we pad the budget, we go back even though we do, we commit to a fixed price, we extort more money at the end of the project anyways. There's some phenomenally bad behavior that occurs, and this is true on Agile teams, not as much, but it is true on Agile teams as well as on traditional teams. And I think I've made a very good case for why the business doesn't trust IT anymore, and nor should they, because of some of the behavior that we have. But anyways, I thought I'd share that. There's another question about having a stand-up meeting around same time. Yeah, you can. Yeah, so when you're a distributed team, you still need to coordinate. You still need to communicate. So you're still going to be doing stand-up meetings or daily meeting or coordination meetings is a better term. We can take the marketing rhetoric out of the term Scrum meeting, and so we have these daily coordination meetings, or maybe more often than daily in some cases. And yeah, that would, if you're distributed, you'd need to do that over the phone, over some sort of chat facility. This is actually one of the things that's built into RTC. So the chat, the chat facility is actually instrumented and integrated right into the tooling, and there's a bunch of features. If you download RTC, you'll see that there's some significant advantage to doing that. But anyways, there's some good stuff there. But I'm going to continue on here and try to answer some of these other questions in a few minutes. So some thoughts regarding governance. So we need to govern these Agile teams, and trust and respect have to be the foundation. Governance should be positive. Like, so many, a very large percentage of IT people really don't like governance, don't think it's very effective, and rightfully so. A lot of IT governance seems to be very ineffective. So we need to look at the whole picture. We need to, so if you're in an organization, you've got some Agile teams, some traditional teams, and some teams doing other things, you're going to govern those projects differently. So the governance effort needs to be flexible. It needs to reflect what they're actually governing. The governors, the senior management, need to understand what they're looking at. They need to understand how these processes work and the implications. One governance process does not fit all. So if you've got an existing documentation serial governance process, inflicting that on an Agile team borders on criminal in my mind. You're going to harm that team so much. And the sad thing, and I see organizations do this all the time, and you'll know an organization is in trouble when somebody says, yeah, you can do any development process you want as long as you follow our governance process. That the people doing the governance fundamentally don't understand what they're looking at. So this is a very serious problem. So once again, if you Google Ambler and governance, you'll find a wealth of information out there that I've written, or Agile governance or Lean governance. You'll find some good stuff out there. So people are in fact governing Agile teams. It is in fact easier to govern Agile teams than it is traditional teams. So if governance is an issue for your organization, and I sincerely hope it is, you should be flocking to Agile. If you truly want to govern. So that's and be effective, of course. But anyways, so and sure enough, we do have some evidence that people are in fact using various governance strategies and industry strategies. And to be fair, not all of these are governance things, but we are seeing some success in using different frameworks and different governance frameworks, different process frameworks, different management frameworks. So it is in fact possible. People are succeeding with Agile in these sorts of environments. Maybe you can too. Finally, we hear this myth all the time that Agile doesn't work for high-risk projects, and you can hear I just laughed at that, at how naive that would be. Agile is far more appropriate for high-risk projects than traditional is, because Agile inherently deals with the risk better because of the the greater, the improved feedback cycle and all that good sort of stuff. So some of the sources of risk are organizational complexities, people wanting to work in different ways and having different visions, domain complexity. So for example, some problems like building an air traffic control system is slightly more difficult than building a website, perhaps. I'm being facetious there. Of course, it's orders of magnitude more complex. Sometimes there's technical complexities such as legacy data, legacy systems, multiple platforms, multiple technologies, some fairly ancient technologies in combination with some fairly new technologies. This is the reality that we're all facing, or that many of us are facing. So we need to respect that. So there are these risks across the board. And sure enough, when you actually start asking what's going on, you're seeing that one of the technical complexities was working with legacy. Well, the vast majority of Agile teams are dealing with legacy in some way. So we're dealing with these higher risk environments as a matter of fact. When it comes to domain complexity, we're actually seeing people are claiming that they're doing some very complex stuff in an Agile environment. Now, one of the challenges with domain complexity is that domain complexity is in the eye of the beholder. So, if I've been working in brokerage for 20 years, then and having worked in brokerage, I've got a fairly good idea what's going on there. Dealing with some of these financial instruments would be child's play for me because I have such deep experience in it. Somebody coming in off the street with almost no brokerage experience would get blown away. It would be phenomenally complex for them. So, domain complexity really is in the eye of the beholder. To sort of start wrapping up before we go to questions, some of the future of Agile. So, like I said, I was one of the people that was invited to the Snowbird, Utah meeting in February to discuss the future of Agile. So this was the 10-year anniversary that And Alistair Coburn was kind enough to go to the effort to organize this event, and it was a wonderful workshop that we did. And at the end of the day, we identified what we call were 4 belief statements. So we believe that we should demand technical excellence, and obviously the Agile community has been pretty good about quality and pretty good about demanding being quality focused. But there was a feeling in the room that we could do better. That so anyway, so we decided we better point that out. We also and what we're also doing in the Agile community reasonably well is promoting individual improvement, like helping people to get better, to become more agile, become more lean, become more effective at their jobs, as well as organizations. So we've been pretty good at the individual and team level, maybe not so good at the organization level yet. So we decided that we better talk about that a bit and sort of push that for the next few years for the Agile community. There was also this desire amongst many in the room to start organizing the Agile knowledge, because there's a lot of really good material out there on the web and in articles and in books and happening on on webcasts like this, but it's not really organized. It's other than having to go to a search engine to find it. So there was this desire to somehow collect it all to help to start putting together a more consistent message. Now whether that ends up being a book of knowledge or a patterns website like we see with c2.com, we don't know, but there was desire to somehow capture this knowledge in a coherent way and to share it in a better and more efficient way. So we'll have to see how that plays out. Personally, I'm not holding a lot of hope for that, but we'll have to see, right? I think it's a worthy goal, and definitely something I do believe in very strongly is improving education. I think we can do a lot better as a community to work with the colleges, to work with the universities, and to help them improve and enhance the way they teach Agile, the way they teach software engineering in general. There's a lot of very good and deep experience in the Agile community, and we need to get better at sharing that. Unfortunately, we've been seeing over the last few years that some of our thought leaders have spent a lot of effort cashing out, and they're running their certification schemes, and good for them. I'm a firm believer in making money, but it's harming the community, and I think we can do a lot better. But it is what it is. Hopefully things will improve, and I've got some fairly deep writings on the Agile certification topic for anybody who's even remotely interested. And then finally, we should be worrying about maximizing value creation across the entire process. And this was something that I was very happy to see emerge out of our discussions, because this is something that we've been focused on a lot at the last few years at IBM. This is, I would argue that the disciplined Agile delivery life cycle, or the disciplined Agile delivery process framework, is all about that. We're looking at least at the delivery process in that methodology, which is far better than we're seeing in any of the mainstream Agile methods right now. And we're also, as I'll talk about in a second, talking about it at scale as well. So this, I think, is absolutely critical. So anyways, if you're interested in what happened at that meeting, if you go to 10yearsagile.org, Alistair Coburn's maintaining that site. There's some good information there. I also wrote a column for Dr. Dobbs' journal, I believe it came out in March, and about my observations, about what we did, about what we, the elephants, what we're calling the elephants in the room. Some of the things the Agile community wasn't all that eager to talk about, which was a real problem. There was a group of dissenters, I guess you would call them, or leading thinkers might be a better way of saying it, that had some very interesting points to make. So anyways, and I sort of prompted them along, and supported them, but I wasn't actively involved in their efforts. But there's some good stuff going on there. So anyways, I highly suggest my column on that topic.
Hey, Scott, you've got just about a little over 5, maybe 7 minutes left, and we're getting a lot of great questions coming in. I want to make sure everyone knows you can keep the questions coming, and we'll make sure that they get answered offline as well. But one question that you should work in there is how people should get started. Scott, I know you got a few more slides, and you can continue through, but slip that one in there somewhere.
Yeah, definitely. That's actually the topic of the next couple slides, and that's it. So anyways, so good point. Okay, so how do you get started adopting Agile? So on an individual level, it's pretty easy. You start doing it. You start doing some reading. You start experimenting with some of the tools and some of the techniques. and just start doing it. And I would hope you'd actually start talking to some of your team members and start doing it in a collaborative manner. But at the and this is actually quite common in many organizations. Agile gets adopted and in the beginning in stealth mode. So people such as yourselves decide, you know what, we can get better. We can start being more efficient, regardless of what we're being told to do. And people just start doing Agile. And what happens is, and it'll take a few years, but they start bubbling to the top. Management starts noticing, hey, this team over here, it seems to be getting better. They seem to be more efficient. What the heck's going on? And you start proving out Agile. But at some point, so stealth adoption is great, but at some point you do need to get management involved. And to start adopting Agile across the board, which is what this slide's all about, is there's like these, what we call the 5 Ps. In order of importance, you need to support people, so you need to train and mentor and educate them, and that sort of stuff happens. You need to have a common set of principles to fall back on. So, if you believe in testing often and early, if you believe quality is job one, if you want to eliminate waste, whatever your principles are, it's the basic driving philosophical foundation of what you're doing. You need practices such as test-driven development, continuous integration, architecture and visioning, and so on, like to actually do the work. You're going to need some tools, some products, and you're finally going to need process to put it all together. And you're going to have to address all 5 of these aspects in some way. And I see in the Agile community, and this is true in the non-Agile community as well, some people will focus on the people issues, some will focus on practices as the secret of the universe. But it's really, you need to address all 5 or you're going to get into trouble. So anyways, something to do. So as far as products go, I was saying this earlier, the Jazz platform really is geared for Agile development. Many of the tools in the Jazz platform, I should say, are geared for Agile development, particularly at scale. And as I was saying, if you want to get started at this, if you want to actually see what the next generation of tooling is like and see how the types of tools that people are using to actually be successful when you're doing Agile at scale, download RTC. You can download a free copy of it. As I said, you can get an up to 10 user version of it, which is fully functional. There's no time limits. It's not one of those download it and use it for 60 days type of a thing. You can run this forever, free of charge for up to 10 users, 10 users per server. So if you could get fancy and implement it on 100 servers and have 100 teams of 10 people each, I guess. But anyways. You didn't hear that from me because the IBM people will beat me up, I guess. But anyways, it is possible. So take a look at it, and you don't even need, just go poke around the Jazz site. There's some really cool stuff going on there. You might be very impressed with the project dashboards. I'll just leave it at that. All those are automated in real time. So any managers in the audience or management wannabes, you might want to go take a look at that. So why IBM? We've been doing Agile for years. Some of our knowledge has been captured in that book, A Practical Guide to Distributed Scrum. There's going to be a phenomenally well-written book coming out in later on this year called Disciplined Agile Delivery. So I would suggest waiting for a copy of that. Makes great gifts for the entire family. We have some great tools, some Jazz platform tools like Rational Team Concert, Rational Quality Manager, Rational Requirements Composer. A bunch of really good stuff there, but please don't trust me. Go take a look at it for yourself. We believe we're the largest Agile adoption in the world. IBM Software Group alone is 27,000 developers worldwide, and we've been actively adopting Agile since 2006, at least officially. We did stealth adoption for several years before that. IBM Global Services has Agile teams who've won awards for some of their work at scale around the world doing Agile development. So there's some really good stuff going on there. So anyways, let's head off to questions. I believe this is my last slide, or second last slide. Oh, some free Agile white papers. Anyways, we'll give these slides out so you can you get all these URLs. Obviously, these URLs are pretty long, so you'll be able to get them. But a lot of the stuff that I've been talking about today, we've documented, and you can download this stuff. The only thing that's not quite there yet is the Disciplined Agile Delivery white paper. It should be there any day now. This URL, though, is accurate. I just believe the file's not yet there. It might be, actually, it might be there today. I didn't try it this morning. But anyways, the white paper will soon be there if it's not already. And then finally, let's go to a question or two. I'm right at the end of the hour, but maybe I can get a question in.
Scott, we're going to extend it and keep you on for at least another 5 or 10 minutes. So
okay.
You've got a lot of questions coming in. I just got to tell you, I've been involved with 3 implementations of Rational Team Concert, from very small Scrum-based efforts to very, very large enterprise-wide efforts, and there's no question that RTC does raise the bar in many different ways. And I know you're going to be talking about that as well as other people will be at the conference coming up in Orlando the week of June the 5th, and that's Innovate 2011. And perhaps you could give us a couple minutes and talk to us about what's going to be happening at that conference, and because I'm sure a lot of people listening would be interested.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks. Yeah, so the first week of June, June 5th to 9th, we're holding the annual IBM Rational Innovate Conference, and this is a conference that really is about a wide range of development topics. Agility at scale is going to be one of several major topics. So will enterprise modernization, systems engineering, enterprise level computing, I guess we would call it, and cloud computing, of course, a few other things. And very, very interesting, wide-ranging, very wide-ranging conference. We're going to have some great talks. I'm giving a couple talks, which will be amazing, but there'll be other people giving equally as amazing and even better talks about Agile and about some of those other topics. So, and it's in Orlando, Disney World. We're going to, every year we take everybody at the conference out to one of the local venues in Orlando. Which, if you're familiar with Orlando, you know that we've got a wide range of options. So I believe this year we're going to the Magic Kingdom, although I could be wrong about that. But it's always great. Every year we have a great time. Wonderful conference. I believe Felicia Day is going to be one of our keynote speakers and one of our hosts. She's a wonderful lady, if you're familiar at all with the gaming community and a few other things she's interested in. So, wonderful lady. That I think we'll have a lot of fun with her. So anyways, yeah, she's in the wizarding world of Harry Potter, is what I've been told via chat. But anyways, come to the conference and meet her, and hopefully you'll get to see her on stage. So I guess I could pick, okay, so what'll happen, we got a lot of questions in the chat, so keep putting them in. So what I'll do, I will commit to answering them. So if there's questions in the chat that we don't get to, I will address them by email, and then we'll get them up on the site here using the magic of the internet somehow. But I'm going to pick about one of the topics. So somebody asked about security. Okay, so I didn't directly address the security issues at all, but yeah, so security is a perfect example of like a non-functional requirement, I guess you would say. So obviously, many systems have to be developed in a secure manner. About a year or two ago, I wrote a column for Dr. Dobbs' journal on addressing non-functional requirements on Agile projects, because there's several techniques for doing that. So, and security being a great example. And so some of the techniques that you want to do, you're going to have to, first of all, do some initial requirement envisioning at the beginning of the project, because if you've got to develop a secure system, that would be a good piece of information to know pretty early on in the project. You're going to have to do some architecture envisioning as well. You're going to have, if you've got this requirement to be secure, well, that's going to affect your architecture. So you're going to have to, want to put this in some of your diagrams and make sure that, if you need a security server, that should get called out fairly early so you can start using it, or you need a firewall, or whatever or encryption, or whatever it is you need. You better make sure that you at least start thinking about it at the beginning. Doesn't mean you need to build everything up front. But it does mean that intelligent, disciplined Agile teams will do some of this thinking up front. You're probably also going to want to have whatever the security requirements are as part of your definition for being done at the end of each iteration. You're probably also, if you want to be smart about it, I would probably have a parallel, particularly if this is a critical issue, which it almost always is. I would probably have an independent test effort, like an independent test team, and this could be just one or two people, that's outside of the development team doing additional testing, and because non-functional requirements have a tendency to slip through the cracks, any even remotely competent independent tester would make sure that they're looking into that. I would also adopt security testing tools. So, for example, Rational App Scan. So, if you're building a website or a non-website even, you should do security testing against it. It has to be secure. And there's some very good tools for that, because you want to automate this and actually potentially make it part of your build. So you want to be really smart about this. So anyways, yes, that's a wonderful question. So it is possible to do this. People are, in fact, building secure systems, even though, in the last few days, there's been some very interesting security breaches at some companies. But it is possible to build secure systems using Agile. But you've got to bake that into your process. You've got to know that you need to do this. So a little more to it than holding a Scrum meeting every day. So, anyways, yes, it is possible.
So, Scott, what would you say are some of the things that are really different about RTC that sets it apart from the other products that are on the market? And of course, I know you're impartial, but the fact is there are some things about RTC that are just different. I mean, scalability up to a mainframe and I-series certainly pops out to me. What would you say are some of the key points?
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, that multi-platform issue is definitely critical. So it's built for it's built as an Eclipse plugin. It plugs into Visual Studio from Microsoft. There's a version of it for System Z or System Z, System I. So if you're doing mainframe or mini type development, then it's a great tool for that. There's we've been having some wonderful experiences, reworking mainframe shops into sort of bring them into the 21st century in their development practices using RTC for Z. The other interesting features, it's instrumented. So, and what that means is that as you're doing various activities, so as your build runs, when you check things in, that little piece of information gets logged. And it seems trivial, but what happens is that information goes into a data warehouse. So based on Cognos technology, we can start doing real-time reporting against what's going on. So we can see the build trend over time. So if your build has been green for many weeks, that's a wonderful piece of information to communicate to the rest of the world. If it hasn't been green, I guess that's good information for the team to know, anyways, because you want to fix things up. But we can start doing if you're capturing defects in the tool, as you work through your work items, as you work through your user stories as your defects, that work is basically being captured, and you can automate reports. This is why I was suggesting to people to look at some of the project dashboards on the Jazz site, because those are live project dashboards for the development teams themselves, so that all the Jazz products are developed using an open commercial methodology, so you can actually see what the heck is going on right then on the spot. So it's really sort of cool, and so they're using the tools to build the tools, so you can actually see it at scale in action. So that's sort of neat. And it's got a bunch of other interesting features like project planning. It's got the electronic task board. So if you're a distributed team, you still want to have a Kanban board or a Scrum board, and so that way you can coordinate your activities and look at what's going on and all that sort of stuff. And you can automate all that, and and it's all built right into the tool. And so this can help you with your coordination meetings when you're distributed. There's somebody else was asking about that. There's features around work item management, for example. So what's called the product backlog in Scrum. Well, when you're a co-located team, yeah, a stack of index cards work fine. When you're distributed, when you're large, when you're in a regulatory environment, you need something a little more sophisticated. So you can do that automatically. You can use that in the tool itself. And then some basic technical features are built right in as well. It has its own configuration management system, so you don't have to fool around. Adopting an SCM system, or you can, if you want to use something else, you can use that too. You can use that as well. So it's flexible that way. There's a build utility or build facility built right in, but you can invoke other build tools as well. So if you love Make or Hudson or whatever else, you can actually invoke that. So it's very flexible that way. But a lot of the basic fundamental tooling is built right in. It's all there in place, up and running, all instrumented, all of it integrated, so you can get up and running really fast. So there's some really good stuff there. You don't have to be toolsmithing all the time like you see in many of the open source environments. So there's a bunch of good stuff going on there.
All right, that's a great summary of this entire effort going on, a fantastic presentation. We've been talking with Scott Ambler, who's the Chief Methodologist for Agile at IBM Rational. Once again, anyone who would like to make sure they got their questions answered can contact me directly. We'll make sure we get it posted on the Agile Journal and CM Journal. For CMC Media, I'm Bob Aiello.